Alright, chat word. Stream is starting right away, as soon as I can. Because tonight, we got the politics stream, boys. We have the Canadian Prime Minister debate coming up in just 3 minutes, and I'm gonna do my thing where I at everyone in the server. I at the Nut Boys, the Knit Boy, and then we jump into it. All right. Oh God, on my Discord.
Long process. We're about to see the culmination.
Okay, so it is about to start. We're about to get into it. We're about to see what's going on with these motherfuckers on the screen right here. We have Justin Trudeau, Aaron O'Toole, Jagmeet Singh, and some others. I can't be fucked to name. So I'm not the biggest head of Canadian politics, but this will be fun. It'll be fun for all of us. It'll be an interesting experience to see a presidential debate. This is the first one I've ever... Or presidential prime minister. God, I am such a fucking American. Okay. No. I'm gonna leave this fucking high-intensity music on as we listen to what's going on.
Fire stuff off. And so he had, in that way, a linguistic advantage over everybody else. And if your first language isn't English, and it isn't for Jagmeet Singh and Aaron O'Toole and Annamie Paul, while they
French,
all,
you mean?
well, yes, yeah, and while they all speak French to a degree, you know, you're dealing with accent. You're dealing with. It's one thing to have a conversation like you and I are doing.
Now, I don't really know what I'm doing. I hope to God everything's correct here.
Tricky.
Stop.
It's tough. Anyone who I think speaks a second language can tell you that they don't feel as confident as they do in their mother tongue. We've just got about 45 seconds left before we go live to the leaders' debate in Gatineau, Quebec.
45 seconds. Oh boy.
Travis, what are you hoping for tonight?
I'm hoping for, a clear, concise message from each of the leaders in terms of how they feel they will lead this country moving forward.
Okay, so we all know that I'm like the dumbest of bitches, right? I'm very much like an idiot who doesn't really know a whole lot about like actual real politics when it comes to like presidential politics and like, you know, how people present themselves and all that. I am a dumb fuck at the end of the day here. And I didn't cover the French debate because, yeah, us weirdo Canadians have French debates. Just because we're like that. Because I don't speak French.
You had an option, sir. You could have said, I am not going to do it.
This was just scattering money around to build gazebos and fake lakes. The one you bought, you can't build.
If you try to open up the treaty, you can lose everything.
And don't try to paper over what's happening in people's lives.
We had to take over the mess that you left us.
It's not economically disastrous. It's a smart economic thing to do.
An agreement between Quebec
Is it now?
and Canada was always impossible.
It's very unclear, Mr. Don't use gobbledygook.
Don't use gobbledygook.
Live from Gatineau, Quebec, this is
I am
the
ready.
2021
I am
Federal
ready.
Leaders Debate. We're coming to you from the Grand Hall in the Canadian Museum of History on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. A place
How many people are streaming Canada right now?
Past. But tonight, we are
2
looking
people
ahead to
and
the
me.
future.
3 people.
Good evening, I'm Shachi Curl,
PragerU?
the president of the
Ooh,
Angus
people are
Reid
streaming
Institute,
PragerU.
and
Ooh.
tonight I will be your moderator. Let's welcome the party leaders. Justin Trudeau for the Liberal Party. Aaron O'Toole for the Conservative Party.
Hey.
Blanchette of the Bloc Québécois.
Pleasure.
Jagmeet Singh of the NDP. And
There he is.
for the Greens. Welcome, leaders.
All right, I'm rooting for Jagmeet.
Tonight's event is being produced for
AI Trump would reply.
by a media
Wait, what the fuck is this? Hang on. I'm getting distracted by the politics section of Twitch. Wait.
The debate is also offered in 10 other languages, including Cree, Inuktitut, Dene, as well as described video and ASL. 20,000 Canadians have weighed in telling us what they want to hear from the leaders, and 5 themes have emerged: leadership and accountability, climate change, reconciliation, affordability, and COVID recovery.
Le Québécois. Yeah, that's right. That's right, Patrick. We got the Québécois up here. We got the Bloc Québécois. No, it's not La Québécois. Hang on. I need to... It's...
directly to the leaders. And you leaders, you've agreed to tonight's rules and format. So, before we begin...
I think that's it. Hang on. Wait, I'm gonna... I can't spell check that in Twitch.
Interrupt each other. I don't want to cut
Be polite.
if I have to, okay? All right, let's get started. You will each get a different question, and you have 45 seconds to answer. You all have a countdown clock. The theme is leadership and accountability. Your speaking order has been determined by draw. And Mr. Singh, you are first. Hi, Mr. Singh.
Hi there.
Mr. Singh, you are popular
That's a funny
and
way to
you
spell funny.
inspire many Canadians. Your
Hey, Che. We're doing politics tonight, so it might be boring.
When it comes to how you'll pay for it all, there's not a lot of details. Given this, how can Canadians know that you are really ready to lead?
Oh, God,
I really
this
appreciate
shitty
the question. And I want to say...
Oh.
I really appreciate the question.
Okay,
and I want
no,
to
we're
say,
good.
Good evening to everyone tuning in. There is a serious question that people are asking themselves in this election. They're wondering who's going to pay the price of this pandemic and the recovery. And we do have bold plans about how we can invest in people. But we are the only party with a credible plan that will not put the burden on people.
Canadians? Yeah, we're doing Canadians.
Unlike Mr. Trudeau and Mr. O'Toole, who voted against making the ultra-rich pay their fair share, we believe that billionaires should pay their fair share. We should end the loopholes and the offshore tax havens that mean billions of dollars are lost, that we are not able to invest in people. We want to put the burden on those that are at the very, very top so we can invest in the solutions that people need. Tackling the climate crisis, investing in housing.
Exactly what you need to do.
Next to you,
Eat the
Mr.
rich.
Trudeau, because you wanted a new
Including
mandate,
Trudeau.
you plunged the country into an election even as the pandemic spurs thousands of new cases. But over the last 18 months, opposition parties...
Yeah, the, Jagmeet,
putting the nation...
the brown man, he is a comrade. He is the NDP. Okay, should probably explain a little bit about, Canadian politics. Liberals are liberals. Bog standard capitalists. They range anywhere from relatively left-wing to center-right. You have the conservative parties who are not as crazy as... You have the conservative party who is not quite as crazy as the Republicans, but...
Tonight, over the next couple of hours,
I mean, this is the first campaign where they actually acknowledge that climate change is a thing.
that are radically different about how
And then you have the NDP, who are wholehearted leftists. The NDP... The only real viable parties are the... How do you spell his troofy name? His goofy name? It's true. You got it right.
Waited a few months, Mr.
I
Trudeau.
know you want to go harder and faster on vaccinations. I know you want to go harder and faster on climate change, and you get to choose exactly that in this election.
All right, that's time. Thank you. Mr. Blanchette, to you. You deny that Quebec...
Yeah, going harder and faster on any of these issues is not going with Trudeau.
Legislation such as Bills 96 and 21, which marginalize religious minorities, Anglophones, and Allophones. Quebec is recognized as a distinct society, but...
Then there's the Bloc Québécois, who are separatists. That's their whole thing. They're also very racist.
Discriminatory laws.
The question seems to imply the answer you want. Those laws are not about discrimination. They are about the values of Quebec.
And yet...
Immediately attacks the interviewer. You love to see it. Harder harder and faster.
As a nation on June 16th by the Parliament.
Oh, I'm gonna...
281 votes said that Quebec is a nation, and everybody here seems to agree with that. No more distinct society, which never had any meaning anyway. Meaning, not meeting.
What the fuck is he talking about? What the fuck is he talking about? He's making no sense. The interviewer's looking at him like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Those are discriminatory laws. We are saying that those are legitimate laws that apply on Quebec territory, and there seems to be people around here who will share this point of view, which is a gain by itself for Quebec.
Looking at the Conservatives.
Mr. Blanchette. Ms. Paul, to you, for millions of voters, this is the climate change election. But at this critical time, you've been bogged down in internal strife. If your own party doesn't fully support you, how
And then we have the Green Party.
You to lead through one of the most defining issues of our times?
It's an excellent question, and it's an honor to
Okay,
be here
I'm talking over all of them. Yeah, the Bloc Québécois are a bunch of fucking separatist fascists, so that's cool. And then the Green Party, their main issue for the entire party is climate change. And I think that's just a failure of branding, because it makes people think their only issue is climate change, and they don't know what the fuck they're doing on anything else. Now, I haven't looked at everybody's positions here, but as far as I know, the Green Party's positions are all, like, really realistic and, like, really good. But obviously there's the failure of branding and calling yourself the Green Party, as in the environmentalist party.
Mr. O'Toole, you recommend vaccinations, but you won't make your candidates.
You got Sikh and black women, diversity. And then there's this asshole.
You're on record supporting the LGBTQ2 community, but you allowed half your MPs to vote against legislation protecting them. Tell me, how can voters trust that it's you and not your caucus that will be in charge of the conservative policy agenda?
Well, thank you, Ms.
They can't. That's the answer to that question.
And we have a plan to get the country back on its feet after a difficult 18 months in this crisis. I'm a pro-choice ally to
he is not gay.
the LGBTQ community. That comes from my service in the military, where I served alongside people from all backgrounds, all orientations, putting the country first. And our platform, including a detailed plan on climate change, is about making sure we secure the future. Jobs, accountability.
Let's make sure we secure the future. Say a little bit more, my friend. Keep going with that. Ooh. This guy is a light fascist. Like, he's very cowardly. He is a very, very cowardly person in that he wants to appeal to racists and fascists, but he will never wholeheartedly adopt their language.
It is now time for our first face-to-face.
He is an infuriating person.
Ms. Paul, you're up, starting with Mr. Trudeau, based on this question. You call yourself a feminist, but on your watch, sexual misconduct in Canada's armed forces continues to run rampant. Tell me, why are you allowing these unacceptable conditions to continue?
I think we recognize that there are systems and institutions that need to change across the country, and that's why from the very beginning, we stepped up with policies, new policies, stronger policies and processes to support every survivor, everyone who comes forward, because nobody deserves to work in a workplace where they are being discriminated against, where they are being harassed or hassled. We have been unequivocal about that. My leadership has been unequivocal about that. Yes, these problems continue in workplaces across the country, particularly in the military. That's unacceptable, which is why we've taken even stronger measures.
I know, our media is great, Patrick.
We're relying on process in this. We want to just be able to have easy answers.
Ms.
But
Paul,
this is
what's
not
your
an
response
issue
to that?
with easy answers. You have to fall back on process.
I have said before, and I'll say again tonight, that I do not believe that Mr. Trudeau is a real feminist. A feminist doesn't continue to push strong women out of his party when they are.
Didn't he do blackface? He did.
And I will say their names tonight and thank them. Thank you, Jane.
So he's the son of another prime minister, Pierre Trudeau, who I think was good. I don't actually know the history on that one.
I believe that
he seemed like a badass from a couple interviews, but I don't know. I don't know. So he's rich. He was a drama teacher as a kid. He has a bunch of political sway just in his name.
At this point, we would have many of the things that we need. I am
a lot of people will say he didn't really earn his way into the position, and I would kind of agree with that.
The Liberal Party has never had a woman lead it. I think it's time for the party to examine its priorities.
Ms. Hall, you'll perhaps understand that I won't take lessons on caucus management from you.
And I think
what I will
that
keep
I won't
focused
take
on
lessons for you,
is
as
making
you
sure
heard.
that our first woman finance minister has moved forward on,
all right, Mr.
child
Trudeau.
care.
Mr. Trudeau,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that's the time. We have to move on. Mr.
Oh boy, desperately pitching his
This
candidacy.
next topic is for you
Amazing.
to debate. Canada's transition to a green economy depends on pipelines. At a time when Ontario and Quebec face uncertain energy supply over Line 5, this country cannot extract nor distribute oil domestically. Our theme is leadership. Tell me, which one of you is best to lead on these complex issues? Mr. Blanchet, per the draw, you begin.
I'm not very much interested in leading Canada. However, I am very much interested in making sure that Quebec is entitled.
He's just like, I don't give a fuck about the environment. Quebec's a country.
We do not have energy issues that much because we are lucky. We are lucky. It's a piece of luck that we can produce green energy in a large amount. But the whole planet cannot afford this idea, this very Canadian idea, this very conservative idea, and as far as I know, this very liberal idea that we have to produce more oil, export more oil, believing that the money from it will reduce gas emission, which won't happen.
Yeah.
All Canadian families deserve an.
Honestly, he's right on that. That he's like, yeah, no, like using more oil is not going to solve the problem.
When it comes to leadership, our natural resources sector is a leader in environmental social governance. Anytime Canadian resources are removed from the global supply chain, you know who fills that gap? Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Russia. All of these organizations and companies are getting their emissions down. Let's get emissions down and Canadian resources to market so that we can have jobs opportunity and fight climate change.
Mr. Singh.
When it comes to leadership on the fighting this essential crisis, one of the biggest crises we're up against, we've got a difficult choice for Canadians. You've got on one side someone who doesn't believe there's a crisis, and then on the other, you have Mr. Trudeau who doesn't act like there's a crisis. And what it's going to take is real leadership, because the solutions are there. We can invest in green energy, clean energy. We can invest in renewable energy.
Doesn't give up on tens of thousands of workers
We'll
across
never
the
give up
country.
on workers. We're
workers that are working hard for their families, so we can get our resources to market.
Just interrupting him. Holy shit! What a piece of shit.
I want to see Canadians get back to work in all sectors.
Oh, fuck you.
And I'm proud of what we produce in our country, whether it's our resources or the resources.
I want to see people get back to work. We need money.
And get our energy.
Hey, mate, there's a pandemic going on. Back to work.
And that's a responsibility of government.
Dairy Queen's not making enough money.
Workers can't afford another 4 years. What we need to do is invest in a diversified economy, clean energy. We need to electrify transportation. We need to invest in retrofitting homes and buildings. We need to create good jobs for workers. Now.
Dude, shut the fuck up.
Economic recovery in all sectors.
What the fuck? Just shut up.
Last word to you, Mr. Blanchet. Last word to you, sir.
Leadership.
Singh didn't get a chance to talk.
Proposing solutions.
What the fuck?
A problem which they're not doing.
Oh.
All right, thank you. My next question is for all of you. We've had some encouraging.
I didn't like talk over him before, right? He didn't get a chance to talk.
Canadians. That said, thousands.
Fucking O'Toole. That's the conservative guy name. His name is literally O'Toole. He just talked over him.
In their hour of need, and it is unknown if we will ever get them all out. To each of you, what would you have done differently? Mr. O'Toole, per the draw, you begin.
Canada should never leave behind people that are at risk because they helped us. When Afghanistan was falling, there were 1,200 Canadians and hundreds more translators and others waiting for help from Canada. What did Mr. Trudeau do? You called an election, sir. You put your own political interests ahead of the well-being of thousands of people. Leadership is about putting others first, not yourself. Mr. Trudeau, you should not have called this election. You should have gotten the job done in Afghanistan.
Mr. O'Toole, as
hold
of the beginning...
Hold on, this is not open debate, leaders. This is a situation where we're
He looks at her like, what the fuck?
Mr. Trudeau, I'm trying to keep track
I would
myself.
like him, Ms. Curl, because he called an election in the fourth wave of a pandemic with fires in British Columbia and with unfinished business in Afghanistan,
All
Mr.
right,
Trudeau.
thank you, Mr. O'Toole. I'm going to give the opportunity next per the draw to Mr. Singh. You guys will have tons of time.
Now, does O'Toole have a plan to help those people in Afghanistan? No, he wants to get back in.
What's happened in Afghanistan is
He would love more war in Afghanistan.
something we knew about. We knew about the withdrawal date. We knew from President Biden what that date would be. And sadly, I agree with Mr. O'Toole on this one point that it was a bad decision to call an election while this crisis was going on, particularly because we've got allies on the ground that put
Are these a bunch of old guys? These are a bunch of Canadian old guys' milk.
who are now looking at peril for their lives and may never get out of
Oh, water. Yeah, drink that water. Yeah, drink.
girls in Afghanistan. It's heartbreaking, and it could have been avoided. Veterans had told Mr. Trudeau and his government
I don't know what came over me
for a
there.
long time that the current approach was not working. Those calls were not heeded, and as a result, we're in this really horrible situation.
Thank you,
it could have
Mr.
been
Singh.
avoided.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Mr. Blanchet.
First, good news. I seem to understand from what I read a few hours ago that Kabul airport is now being opened for some people to get out of the country, which is very good news. This should have been worked a long time ago. I agree with Mr. O'Toole that Mr.
All of them are going to say, yes, this should have been done a long time ago. Yes, that should have blah, 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 fucking blah. And no one on this stage is at fault for this, but
with other countries.
you want free sweep time? Free swipe time? Free swipe? I don't know what you mean. But a lot of people are just going to be like, oh, yeah, you know, this is a bad scenario and blah, blah, blah. We didn't have any fucking control over this. We didn't have any control over the Afghanistan situation. I don't know why this is a big talking point in the debate.
The leaders on this stage talking
Here's
down
what
the
he has to say.
incredible work that our Canadian armed forces, that our
Free cats, too, and coffee. Okay, vote for NDP. They'll give you free cats and coffee.
To ensure that as of the very beginning of August, well before this election, we were getting flights out of Afghanistan. We got 3,700 people out of Afghanistan. And over the past weeks, we've been working with the Qataris, for example, on exactly that good news that we've seen of more people, more Canadians getting out of Afghanistan. We work closely with our allies because we know Canadians sacrificed in Afghanistan for a better future. We need to stand by the people who helped us, who helped themselves, and we will with even more people coming to Canada in the coming months.
All right, Mr.
Ooh, he's shaking. He's shaking. Trudeau is shaking.
And with a husband who provided
Okay, I do want to hear what she has to say.
the peace negotiations in Afghanistan. We were hearing the stories all the time in the months leading up. That this
All right, never mind. She's saying the same fucking thing.
it seems like we got better information.
We never should have been in Afghanistan with the United States in the first place. Obviously, you know, we have our own translators and we have our own diplomats over there, and we have journalists and people on the ground. But the Taliban takeover was not our fault. We knew about it. We knew the American withdrawal was going to happen. I guess we just didn't think the Taliban would have taken over in less than 48 hours.
Was not the right thing to do. And to borrow a line
But
from
we never should have had a major presence in Afghanistan in the first place. We never should have had, all the people that are there. Like, this is a gigantic disaster that the Americans caused.
At open debate.
So,
Jumping off of this question.
like, it's a completely irrelevant talking point to this debate, but it's literally just there for the rest of the candidates to take pot shots at Trudeau. That's all that question is there for.
About our already tense relationship with China, such as telecommunications, security, and foreign investment. Some say this all comes down to a trade-off between Canada's economic growth.
Death to America, exactly. So here's something weird. We're holding the CEO of Huawei hostage because the U.S. told us to. So China, now, like, it was not because the U.S. told us to, it's because we have our own diplomacy that we need to do. Blah, 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 blah. We have our own bureaucracy. China, in response to our bureaucracy, decides to just take a couple Canadians hostage. So,
we need to work with our allies, apply pressure.
it's great.
And make sure that we return these Canadians home. That's what we've got to do.
And that's exactly what we've been doing.
It is a shitty situation. I don't have an answer to this. Stop listening to the U.S. It wasn't about listening to the U.S. It was about bureaucracy. We had to do a bunch of paperwork and start filing things to get her back to China properly because the Chinese dictator is a fucking psychopath. They thought that
economically where we
you know, we're keeping her there, we're keeping the CEO of Huawei just because the U.S. told us to, and we're not. We don't want to do what the U.S. is telling us to. But now China's holding our people hostage.
Mr. Trudeau, we have not worked with our allies on Huawei. We have not stood up for the 300,000 Canadians in Hong Kong. We've not fought for the two Michaels and put pressure on the communist regime. We have not stood up for human rights. Sir, you did not show up for a vote declaring a genocide towards the Uyghur people. You didn't show up. Canada is the country that was leading the fight against apartheid. We created the UN Human Rights Code. We should be leaders for our values, sir. And you've let the Michaels down, and we have to get serious with China.
If you want to let the Michaels and get the Michaels home, you do not simply lob tomatoes across the Pacific. That is what Mr. Harper tried for a number of years and didn't get anywhere. You need to engage in a sophisticated way with our allies every step of the way.
You have to take the same position on Huawei,
and that's exactly
on steel,
what we have done
on
every step of the time.
Mr. O'Toole.
Cyber security.
Communism is when kidnapping. I know. It's annoying that he's not calling them a dictatorship, but whatever.
You started as Prime Minister saying you admired China.
I'm coming to you, Ms. Paul.
Fucking O'Toole, that was years ago, well before they kidnapped someone. Suck my dick. Hey.
We're talking about leadership and accountability.
Welcome to the politics stream.
Of leadership that has been a failure. It's the fact that when we talk about leadership, it means
oh, that's Jeffrey. I didn't even see that was you at first.
Here in Canada, we saw the worst conditions in
Mr. Singh, we're going to have time to chat with that later. The topic is China, human rights, and economic growth. To you, Ms. Paul.
Yes.
Did she just shut him down?
Where certainly lines are being redrawn all across the world, and the main thing that Canada is going to have going forward in terms of currency is its word. When we make a promise, we have to keep those promises. That's how, when we need help, we get it. You know, my mom grew up on a farm in a small community, and she learned very young and taught us that you have to give your word to your neighbors, and they have to be able to count on it so that when you need help, they're there for you. And so when we don't show up, when we're asked for vaccines from COVAX, and then we take vaccines from COVAX, when the Uyghur ask us for help to declare a genocide and we don't do that, when we don't show up on the climate by setting targets that are ambitious, but at the same time in line with our international partners and do our fair share, then our word doesn't count for much, and then it makes it very hard for us to help people like the Michaels when they need us the most.
Mr. Blanchet, did you want to get in on
Chewing
this?
tomatoes might not be the solution, but I would submit humbly that doing...
Canada's House of Commons has voted overwhelmingly to declare China's treatment of the Uyghur minority population a genocide. Okay, that's what's going on.
We might name Uyghur in Xinjiang, we might name Taiwan, Hong Kong, we might name Catalonia, and Mr. President, we might name the worst of all,
Mr. Blanchet.
Raif Badawi being still held in Saudi Arabia because Canada wants to sell weapon and military supply to Saudi Arabia, which is the Parliament voted.
Okay, gentlemen, one at a time.
2 seconds. The Parliament voted unanimously to give citizenship to Raif Badawi. Nothing has been done afterward.
All right. Whoa, Mr. O'Toole, Mr. Trudeau, Mr. Singh.
Mr. Blanchet is correct. Canada is needed back on the world stage. We may be smaller
than
China with respect to population and economy, but we are a giant when it comes to our commitments to human rights, to dignity, and to the rule of law. And we have to start working with our allies to take a more serious approach for human rights, standing up for our workers on fair trade, and making sure that our voice is a principle.
I'm good, thanks. I don't want to do imperialism again.
Mr. O'Toole and his principles is he says all the right-sounding things, and he's working on reassuring everyone that he's right there as a strong leader. But he can't convince his candidates to get vaccinated. He can't convince his MPs to follow his
let's keep the theme, Mr. Singh. You wanted to get in. I'm giving the last word. I'm giving the last word to Mr. Singh. Mr. Trudeau, please. To you, Mr. Singh.
Leadership means standing up. It means standing up for the Uyghur in China. It means standing up to defend people.
I think Trudeau's going to lose this election.
Leadership when it comes to fighting the climate crisis, we've got the worst record.
That's bad because the Conservatives are going to win.
That's not leadership, certainly not.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, leaders. We are now moving on to our next theme, which is climate change.
By the way, I'm voting tomorrow, and I'm voting for NDP. After everything that's gone on, after how much the NDP have done for COVID, because they've done a shit ton, they've pressured Trudeau and the Liberals intensely to get shit like CERB passed, and to help with negotiations on getting vaccines.
Green technology more accessible and affordable so that everyday Canadians don't have to bear.
And Trudeau has just been lacking. He's been in scandal after scandal after scandal. Like every year, it's like 4 or 5 scandals. Not as much as Trump, but for a liberal candidate or for a liberal leader, that's a lot.
Trevor, that's exactly where your head should be at. That's where all of our heads should be at. How can we use this opportunity to seize the moment to create a green economy? How can we incentivize every single person in
So I'm probably going to end up voting NDP.
Every enterprise to adopt green technologies? How can we become a global leader? And so absolutely, if you look at our platform, you will see that we propose incentives all the way from buying electric cars, new and used, to retrofitting homes, to all of these items that will help make life easier for you and help for you to do your part. But this is a national and international issue. We need national leadership on it, and we need it across.
It's just about a popularity contest.
Thank you.
And Trudeau's not winning.
And I'm sure you speak to a lot of young people as a teacher and are seeing the fear in their eyes, the worry and the desperation that young people have because they don't know what type of future they're going to inherit. And they're worried about the impacts of the climate crisis because it's hurting us now and it's only going to get worse if we don't do anything about it. And to invest in that future, we need to make choices. And right now, we look at the choices Mr. Trudeau has made over the past 6 years. He has promised to end fossil fuel subsidies, but instead of ending them, he has increased them to $900 million per year. That is money we could spend on investing in clean technology, in making it easier for people to access that technology and to do our part to fight the climate crisis. So it's a matter of choices. We can't afford another 4 years of Mr. Trudeau's choices.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. To you, Mr. O'Toole.
Thank you for the question, Trevor. I was raised by 2 strong women who were teachers, and they told me to be straight up. This is an area
he
where
had gay parents,
we have to
apparently.
win back some trust. We hadn't met the expectations of Canadians on climate change. It's an important issue for me as a father of a high schooler, and we talk about it all the time. That's why in April, long before the election, I put out a substantial package pricing carbon to meet our Paris targets. And what's interesting, our low carbon savings account will allow people to actually make green choices to lower their carbon footprint. This approach is innovative because it would allow all Canadians to know what their carbon footprint is.
What? It's not an individual issue, you dumb fuck. No, it's corporations causing. It's like large-scale pollution. It's not about like individual Canadians like using plastic straws. Fuck.
First, you put a ceiling on any production of oil and gas. You take all the money that the federal government is placing into that industry, even more by the Liberals than the Conservatives before, and you put that into green energy. And you take the money for Trans Mountain and you give it to Alberta for Alberta to initiate its own transition.
Okay, kind of.
A greener economy. This is the way to do things, because if we don't do that and keep dreaming about reducing gas emission while increasing production, we will never get there.
Okay, kind of. I don't agree with giving the money to Alberta, but yes.
Thank you, Trevor, for your
He's actually said like the most direct thing, surprisingly enough, on climate.
Your decisions and what you share with your students in science. And all these leaders on here have various claims about what their climate change plan is going to do. Unfortunately, if you look at what the experts and the climate scientists and the economists have said, we're the ones with the strongest plan to fight climate change. And how to answer your question specifically, how to make it more affordable for Canadians? Well, the first thing...
There's so much political jargon. How the fuck do I help teach my loved ones? We'll get there.
Businesses to go cleaner,
maybe, probably not.
At the same time as it puts more money in families' pockets. We are going to put a cap on oil sands and oil and gas emissions and decline it until net zero and create those opportunities and investments that are going to make it more affordable for you and your students for many years to come.
Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. Thank you, Trevor. Have a good evening. I'm turning.
Yeah, Trudeau's climate policy has been the bare minimum of not bad, but it doesn't go anywhere near far enough.
Your topic is climate change. Even today, 1 in 4 Canadians don't believe that climate change is caused by human activity. How can
that
we
hurts.
achieve real progress when so many people are still debating the fundamentals? Mr. O'Toole, you begin.
Climate change is a real...
O'Toole, get the fuck out of the race if you want to do that.
That's why we have
Sorry.
to take a serious plan to tackle it. That's why, as I said, we put our plan out in April because we had to restore some trust on this issue.
Okay, if you want people to learn that climate change is real, get all conservatives out of politics.
We have a plan to meet our Paris targets, but minimize the impact on jobs and investment. We're also going to make major...
Okay, O'Toole, let me explain this to you. If you delete one industry, you have to replace it with another.
we can do to get our emissions down.
Jobs won't go away. You're going to be creating a new industry where there are a ton of new jobs.
Mr. O'Toole has never understood is you can't have a strong economy unless you tackle climate change. And you ask about how we're going to convince the quarter of Canadians who still don't think climate change is real. Well, Mr. O'Toole can't even convince his party that climate change is real.
Yes.
They voted against that. And that's perhaps why his plan is so weak. His plan is to go back to the Harper targets, to the Harper approach on fighting climate change, which doesn't work. His costed platform, which he just put out last night, cuts $2 billion.
Yeah, they have to make the climate change thing an economy issue. Because in at least liberal society, it is an economy issue. How are we going to completely uproot the way that we do all factories and farming and mining and energy production while minimizing the impact on the actual economy? Because if we just delete those things, everyone will die. That's how we've set up the economy. That's how we've set up society.
We have a plan that we will so it's actually quite difficult to meet a target 9 years away, except for the fact that right now we are on track.
Gentlemen, we have to.
Money is fake, true.
All right, we are moving on. We are moving on, leaders. Next up is Mr.
But
Singh.
it makes more money to be not eco-friendly.
I'd like each of you to describe
And
how
the most powerful people in the world have a vested interest in making everybody believe that money is real.
significant regional differences involved in fighting climate change. You begin, Mr. Singh. You may jump in one at a time, please.
Of course.
Well, here's the thing. We just heard Mr. O'Toole and Mr. Trudeau argue about who's worse. And honestly, it's a tough question to answer. Let me tell you, you're not stuck with these two. Better is possible. We can invest in a clean economy. We can end fossil fuel subsidies. We can make sure we're creating clean transportation, and we can invest in provinces and territories. I'm going to be a dad soon, and I want to make sure my child grows up into a future that has the same opportunities that I had, that has clean air, clean water, a clean place to live. I want to make sure that that's
as far as I understand it, it is not a national or even less a regional issue. It is a planetary issue. And it has to be tackled by everybody at once. But I would be glad to give some of my precious time to Mr. O'Toole.
And my paycheck's coming in next week, and all of it's going to school. So.
That he did not want anymore to have a pipeline to go through Quebec. That was quite a statement. He said that in French, no more pipeline through Quebec. I want to hear that in English tonight. Please, please.
Well, Mr.
Hold on. This segment is
I'll take time.
Quite frankly.
No, it's not your time, motherfucker. Shut up.
On the climate, this sort of approach is going to get us nowhere, and I mean but nowhere. It is, and the question was an excellent one. This is a global issue. This is a national issue. This is a nonpartisan issue, and we have got
Patrick, you have more money than me. Okay.
party lines.
Good luck, Patrick.
I said that I was available for a debate just on the climate because it's that important. But we've invited many times all of the parties to join us in a joint cabinet, a cross-party cabinet, to deal with this the way that we dealt with the pandemic together. People were so inspired to see these leaders come together in the early days of the pandemic. We have got to bring that same approach here. Let's come together because that's what's needed.
Thank you very much. I absolutely agree. We do need to come together. I can lay out what we shouldn't do and what we need to do. What we shouldn't do is what Mr. Trudeau did. Set targets and miss them. We shouldn't promise to end fossil fuel subsidies and then increase them. We shouldn't put a price on pollution and then exempt the biggest polluters. What we need to do is end those fossil fuel subsidies, invest in provinces and territories with infrastructure that's going to help us
with the greatest of respect to Ms. Paul. Hold on, Mr. Singh. With the greatest of respect to
let Ms. Paul respond.
With the greatest of respect to Mr. Singh, we have been making this invitation for years, and it has never been accepted by the NDP or any other party.
All right, we have to wrap this section now, leaders. It is time for me, with great pleasure, to welcome Mercedes Stevenson of Global News. She is joining us now, and she's going to be asking each of you a direct question on climate
Why is there another one?
This round starts with Mr. Trudeau. Hi, Mercedes.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Hello,
God.
candidates. It's a pleasure to have the
God, she's
opportunity
white.
to ask
Oh,
you
God.
a question that is on a lot of Canadians' minds, the question of climate change. Mr. Trudeau, starting with you. On your watch, Canada's greenhouse gas emissions have gone up every year since 2016, giving this country the worst emissions reduction record in the G7. According to the most recent data from your government, Canada's emissions in 2019 were just as high as they were 15 years ago. Environmentalists say that your performance is insufficient. If you're so serious about climate change, why are Canada's emissions?
Hell yeah, new car.
We inherited a government from a conservatives that did not believe in the fight against climate change, and we had a lot of catching up to do. But what we were able to do in 6 years is bring a national price on pollution, ban single-use plastics, move forward in protecting more of our coasts and oceans and rivers than any government in history. And we are right now
Shitting and pissing and coming. Patrick, I'm very happy for you. That's fucking awesome.
At Paris, down to 36%.
Oh God, I wish I had
We've
5K.
gone even further with that, with a concrete plan that the experts have said is the only one that can achieve a 40% reduction.
Which they say you're unlikely to
That
meet.
is what we're dealing with.
Yeah, it's almost as if you spend your money and stimulate the economy or something. Weird.
Criticizes the oil and gas industry in Canada's western provinces. You've said that you would block pipelines trying to go through Quebec. While you were the environment minister, though, you allowed oil exploration and carbon-intensive projects without environmental assessment. So why the double standard, and what do you say to Canadians who feel that you're blocking their prosperity?
There were three issues that have been raised since I've been into this election. First one is having reversed the 9B line of Enbridge, which had been reversed.
I'm not gonna lie, I don't know what the fuck they're talking about.
Evaluation or anything. Second one is a project in Bédéchaleur, which already had been submitted to an evaluation, an environmental evaluation. And the other one was to have an environmental, I will come to that, evaluation after the exploration. This is all a build-up made by the previously environmentalist Stephen Guilbeault from the Parti Libéral, which the Prime Minister did not even know about when he attacked me with it. My record is also having signed the
New job, new pogs.
market with California, which is still considered the best.
We're not gonna die.
The gas emission incentives and tariffs around, I wouldn't say the world,
All right,
at
Mr.
least North
Blanchet,
America.
That is time. Mercedes, your next question.
Mr. O'Toole, you're
Patrick, I want to give you money really badly.
plan, Canada would abandon its current climate
But
target.
I, as much as I want to, I actually can't right now.
In fact, it's one set 6 years ago by Stephen Harper. World leaders are meeting this fall to ratchet up their commitments on climate change on the global stage, yet you would walk ours back. You've said that climate change is real, and you've endorsed carbon pricing.
Eat the rich.
But your target is the lowest of all of the major parties who are here tonight. Why should Canadians settle for your plan and a plan that would take our targets back in time?
Because Canadians deserve to have a plan and leadership to make the targets. Mr. Trudeau went to Paris. The targets I'm talking about making are the ones he signed on to, and then for 6 years did not make them. He likes to blame everyone else
Oh, he's
but
stuttering.
himself for action. So what we did, because as I said, Mercedes, we have to build trust on this issue. We went out and worked.
Call me Jefferina Bezos because I'm Amazon Prime rich as fuck.
to get our emissions down to meet Paris, but to also get people back to work. After COVID-19, with $500 billion worth of debt put on by Mr. Trudeau, with a cost of living crisis, we also need to have a strong economy to get our emissions down. We will make our emission targets, and I think it's important.
Oh my God.
To have a plan. To
I'm about to reach affiliate.
On to internationally.
What the fuck? Hang on. Whoa, slow down, everybody.
A big focus in your plan calls for a 60% reduction in Canada's emissions by the year 2030. Other countries that are making that commitment don't face the same challenges that we do here in Canada. We live in a cold, northern, sprawling country, and our economy still relies on resource extraction, much of which you've said you would shut down completely in your platform. How would you offset the economic harm that would result from meeting such an aggressive target?
I'm sorry. I just need to. I'm just reeling a little bit. What the fuck?
And I think about the future of energy. Canada will remain.
I need to go thank some people after this fucking stream. I'm not there yet.
And I think about my brother who was a roughneck out on the oil patch until the bust during the pandemic. And I think about his future.
Okay.
I know that we have got to diversify our economy. But I tell the people of Canada today that what
Okay, I'm gonna fucking cry now. I'm sorry, I can't focus on the politics. I just realized, holy shit.
promises are a mirage that's just out there in the distance that we never arrive at. Or you can send people back to Ottawa from
Okay, I'm gonna cry later. I need to focus.
together across party lines on the greatest existential challenge of our time and seizing the opportunity of a truly green recovery.
Holy shit, I'm gonna cry later. What the fuck?
All talk and no action when it comes to climate change, and yet you won't even give Canadians a straight answer on whether or not you would cancel the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. You've had years as NDP leader to develop a climate plan.
Patrick, I've been streaming since 2019.
And big targets, but almost no details on how you would get there. Don't you owe Canadians a clear answer?
And I've been making like YouTube videos for
Absolutely.
too long.
We've got a bold plan that's going to take a lot of courage. Absolutely. That requires lots of
Too long.
investment because we know how serious this crisis is. And we know what we're up against. Unlike Mr. Trudeau, we're not going to blame...
I'm not gonna lie, I don't care about the climate change thing anymore because for the most part, like, we can do our part, obviously.
Vote for the same things, we're going to get the same results.
Singh and the Green Party would have the best shot at improving climate change, but
end fossil fuel subsidies, use that to invest in clean energy.
You know.
We would make sure we prioritize investing in electrified transportation.
we're getting a fucking conservative elected, so.
Retrofitting homes and buildings.
Streamed 3 years ago,
There is so
2
much that
years
we can
ago.
do. We are confident we can do it. But there is a cost
Oh,
if
man.
we continue down the same path of conservative or liberals who don't take this seriously. You have a choice.
All right. Thank you.
What was my first stream? Child of Light?
Mercedes is
Nintendo
going
Direct?
to keep you leaders on
Bootleg
theme.
games?
I'm going to
Dark
keep you
Souls?
on
Hollow
time and Make
Knight?
sure everyone has a chance to be heard. Ms. Paul, we're starting with you. Back to you, Mercedes.
Thank you.
Lego Harry Potter?
Want their government to fight climate change, but they also worry about the cost for their families. And we know there will be
3 years ago. 4 years ago. 5 years ago. Wow, I've been making YouTube videos for like 5 years.
There is a global green rush going on now to create the competitive green economy of the future. What the Greens don't want to see is Canada being left behind, because that is exactly what's happening. You know, I'm sure that the last candle maker was the person that had the market cornered on candle making, but if everyone has moved on to LED lights, then you're in trouble. And so what we want to see is us seizing this opportunity. And Mercedes, to your earlier question, if Denmark and Greenland, other cold countries, can end oil exploration, then certainly we can do it. And if 27 countries in the European Union can come together collaboratively to have an ambitious plan for the climate, then surely with leadership, we can do the same here in Canada. I know Canada can do anything that any
I
other
remember
country.
watching you stream before I started my last year of high school, yeah. It's been too
Any
fucking
type
long,
of energy
dude.
is removed from the global market. Canadian energy, it's replaced.
Sonic 06 was one of my first streams.
That doesn't have carbon.
It's been 2 years.
Programs. It doesn't have human rights. It doesn't have engagement
Damn.
with Indigenous communities. Indigenous partnerships in natural resources is huge. So you said the cost. There are tens of thousands of jobs that deserve an economic recovery just as much as
Oh
any.
my god, and Let's Go Pikachu, or sorry, Let's Go Eevee was my first, one of my first streams as well.
And a move towards a
Holy shit.
net zero by 2050. So let's be leaders in getting carbon emissions down and being world leaders on how
I played Roboblast 2 years ago?
timber, rare earth minerals for EVs, we can be world leaders again.
Sorry, climate change is not at all my wheelhouse, so I just don't care.
Is an entire town of Lytton being wiped out by a climate forest fire. The cost of inaction is forest fires and flooding and heat waves that mean Canadians lose their lives. The cost of not acting means a young woman I met in Hamilton who looked me in the eyes and said,
Girl, I'm so emo and edgy. Why do you want to talk to Stinky Man? I was a dick.
when I don't know
I still am a dick, but I was a dick, big time.
my child. That's the cost of inaction. That's the cost of Mr. Trudeau, who had 6 years.
Listen, people are fucking hard, okay? Talking to people is hard and not easy. and dumb and bullshit.
Again,
all of us.
Mr. Trudeau.
When we talk about a climate crisis, we have to deal in facts. And one of the facts I need to correct right now that everyone is laid into is we have not missed any of our targets. We are on track to exceeding our targets. And it's important that we are on facts. Secondly, I do have a question for Mr. Singh. We need to talk about science.
What are you talking about?
Agree on that, you and I both. So how is it that the experts that have rated
Just let Indigenous people do their fucking thing? True.
your plan to be an
We're the
F?
experts.
I rate your track record an F, Mr. Trudeau. You've had 6
not
years.
You. You don't get to rate.
I
People
rate.
know.
Well, not just
Politicians,
me.
experts. Why did the experts give you an F on your climate plan?
Mr. Singh
Let's talk about
Mr.
right now.
Trudeau.
Let me respond to this.
Why did they give you
You're
an F?
talking about the future. Let's talk about right now. You had 6 years,
Why did
and
you
you've got
get
the. Let me
an
finish.
F
Let me
on
finish.
climate?
You've got the worst track record in all the G7 after 6 years. How can
Mr.
people
Singh,
trust you?
Why
How
didn't
can people
you
have
put
confidence
forward
Trudeau,
an
hold on,
ambitious
someone that is
All right,
plan?
Mr. Singh,
He
Mr.
didn't
Trudeau,
answer.
then Ms.
Why?
Paul.
I don't accept that, first of all. I don't
Time's
accept that at all. We've got a
wasted.
bold
Hold
plan
on, Ms.
and
Paul.
a strong plan.
Mr. Singh, thank you very much.
Played Klonoa years ago. Oh, I have to play that on stream.
Why his plan
We've got a
is
strong
being
plan.
panned by experts. Now, every
excellent plan.
politician up here says, we have the best plan. We actually have a
you have the
record.
worst
And
record.
what
Mr.
Mercedes' question was, how do we make sure it's affordable? We brought in a price on pollution across
Oh my
the
god, it has been too long.
more money.
Did I finish
back in the
VVVVV?
provinces where it had to be imposed because conservative politicians fought against it every step of the way.
Ms.
And
Paul,
exempts the biggest
Ms.
polluters.
Paul.
With the greatest of respect, I think the 5 PhDs in our shadow cabinet who put together our green recovery policy would disagree with you, with the experts. But I do want to say more generally that, again, this is getting us nowhere. We have got to be able to come together across party lines, not only to face the existential crisis that Mr. Singh described, but also to seize the greatest economic opportunity that Canada has seen within our lifetimes.
I'm just looking through some of the old VODs on the
United
channel.
States can do it. If the European Union can do it, I know that we can do it. It's about a change in the culture.
All right, thank you, Ms. Paul. Mr. Blanchette, did you want to get
There's so much stuff that's been like
Behind
recent.
everybody else, and I have.
Wow, I don't have that many videos.
take
I
some
will
time,
disagree
sir?
with the basic statement. There's possibility
Damn.
to create more wealth to absorb the cost of the changes that we need.
I don't stream enough.
Opposing environment and creating wealth. It may go together well. This is the change that we have to do.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mercedes. And now, leaders, we are moving on to our next theme, reconciliation. Now we are going to our first-time voter, Merrick McLeod in Sault Ste. Marie. He's got a question to all the leaders. Merrick, you're 18 years old. You're a first-time voter. What is your question to the leaders? Go ahead, Merrick. The leaders are listening.
Ani Bojo. In the Ojibwe culture, trust and respect is key to any relationship.
You got it, Merrick. Keep going.
How can I
Oh.
respect the federal government after 150 plus years of lies and abuse to my people? And as Prime Minister, what will you do to rebuild the trust between First Nations and the federal government?
Thank you, Merrick. Leaders, you've heard the question. How do you respond to Merrick? Mr. Trudeau, you start this round.
Thank you, Merrick, for your question. You're absolutely right. Over the past 150 years, Canada has failed in its relationship with Indigenous peoples. People who we should be working with and shared stewardship.
He's actually adorable.
In partnership as we draw from the bounty and the beauty of this land to build a better future for all. That is why over the past 6 years, we have stepped up on the path of reconciliation.
Sorry.
Ended,
I need to.
water advisories in 109 communities. We have made sure that tens of thousands of young people get to go to school.
Yeah, there's a lot of white Indigenous people, basically. Well, not white Indigenous, but like white passing Indigenous people. People with Indigenous heritage
Ensuring a true partnership as we
in Canada. Like a lot of people. It's more common than you would think.
Your question is quite moving. I would say that no one is entitled to tell any nation what to do or what to think. and that every nation has to be recognized as such. Either it is a nation of 300 people, like there is in Quebec, or an 8 million people nation like Quebec is. It calls for a relationship between equals. It calls for a relationship.
I just remembered this. I think you were there for this, Patrick.
The other party, that they are stronger, bigger, richer, and therefore you will do as you are told, even if we say it politely. And first, you provide clean water to everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchette. Ms. Paul.
That's good.
And thank you
Quality.
so much for the question. And I understand the anguish in it as well, because justice delayed is justice denied. And coming from a diaspora myself, where we have been robbed of our culture, of our languages, of our history, I have no idea where my ancestors were born or where they're buried. I completely understand how important this is and how frustrating it is not to have seen the action. I am tired of being up on these stages without Indigenous leadership here to speak for itself. Jody Wilson-Raybould, Mumalak Kalak, I'm thinking of you right now. And when Mumalak, Ms. Kakak said...
Yeah, you were there for the Sonic Generation stream.
Would be hollow, she was right. So Indigenous sovereignty, self-determination, nation-to-nation engagement, that is my commitment.
Mr. O'Toole.
Mr. McLeod, thank you for the question. And the way you phrased it is so important. Reconciliation is about trust and respect and restoring it after a century and a half of a federal government failing. That's why, as opposition leader, my first question when I rose in the House of Commons was on a call to action on reconciliation with respect to Indigenous health. We need to build partnerships. We need to restore trust. And that trust is eroded when you make commitments on safe drinking water on reserve, when you make commitments on the calls to action in the Truth.
Did you send me a weird snap about Sonic porn?
So I want to build partnerships and have Indigenous leaders have governance over the federal government.
Okay, I need to focus on the stream.
To Indigenous peoples.
Mr. Singh.
Thank you very much, Merrick. Thank you for your question. How to restore trust? How do you restore trust when Indigenous communities suffer injustice and it continues in an unbroken line to this very day? How do you restore trust when you've
reparations
one day and then takes Indigenous kids to court the next? And how do you restore trust in a country as wealthy as ours, a G7 nation in the 21st century, that still does not provide clean drinking water to every single Indigenous nation? It starts by actually walking the path of reconciliation, not with the empty words, but real action, clean water, nation to nation, and
We're
respect.
calling it reconciliation, but it's reparations.
Did the leaders answer your question?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. Miigwech. Messieurs Blanchette and O'Toole, it is your turn to debate now. You've promised more money to search for unmarked graves, but so much more needs to be done to achieve meaningful reconciliation. Mr. Blanchette, you begin. Tell me, how are you better positioned than Mr. O'Toole to restore justice?
I am not better positioned than Mr. O'Toole because I believe that this is a relationship between nations, and your presence a nation, I feel I represent another one, and we are discussing with a lot of other nations. But I will remind everybody that on the last day of the last session, we had a motion adopted unanimously by the Parliament, and this motion was precisely saying what we had been told to carry by the First Nation leaders. And
I seriously streamed a Klonoa game? Sorry, I'm thinking about this again. Open Steam. I'm sorry.
And our voices in the Parliament with the First Nations in order to have them being heard by
I guess I did.
After the tragic finding of graves in Kamloops,
I can't believe I couldn't remember that.
Former residential school sites, we offered to work in a bipartisan fashion on calls to action 71 to 76. Those are related to former residential school sites. And we need to act faster. I know Mr. Trudeau cares a great deal about reconciliation. I know we all do. But this is an issue where we have to act. We can no longer say that we recognize the calls to action. We need a plan to achieve them. And what I'm proposing is a plan that builds partnerships, that builds governance, that has Indigenous leaders, incredible ones like Jody Wilson-Raybould, to allow us to actually hold ourselves to account. All parties, all future governments. This is the biggest scar in the history of Canada. And we have to tackle it not just
Gamer
with
music.
intentions, but with
Listen, I'm vibing a little bit. I might be vibing a little bit too hard.
Mr. Blanchet,
I must say
briefly.
that the Prime Minister
Patrick,
has
this
nominated
also, can you guess,
Gouverneur Général,
could you possibly guess what franchise this music is from?
but does not speak French. Still, he does not agree with the idea of recognizing First Nation languages as official languages.
Ooh, oh, that's a bit of a burn.
We will leave that segment there. Ms. Paul, Mr. Singh, Mr.
Okay,
Trudeau,
well.
you're up. Tell me, what is your plan to end the ongoing disproportionate violence against Indigenous women and girls?
Defund the police.
Make space for Indigenous leadership because, you know, we
Oh
have
wait,
done
violence in general?
made all these promises. We
Or
know
like
what needs
sexual
to be done.
violence?
The
Okay.
recommendations are there in the
Never mind.
calls for justice and the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls report, and yet we still don't have the action. And so, as I said before, it should be Jody up here answering
Hi,
that question.
Patrick.
It should be
Mike?
Mumala Kakak up here answering that question. We need to make the space for Indigenous leadership
Hi,
to guide this process.
Okay, no, it's working.
All we need to make this a priority. All that is left now is political will.
But that is exactly what we have been doing, Ms. Paul. When we called the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls after years of governments avoiding doing that, we ensured that we brought the truth forward. And then we worked with Indigenous leaders groups, Indigenous women's groups to co-develop the action plan that we are now fully funding so we can get justice for the victims, healing for the families, and put an end to this ongoing national tragedy. It will take a lot of work by all of us, but we are walking this road in partnership because we know it needs to be done and there is much more to do.
But Mr. Trudeau, sadly, and this I don't take any pleasure in this, the calls to justice are out there and you haven't acted on them. And,
Yep.
I meant it when I said you can't take a knee one day if you're going to take Indigenous kids to court the next. That's not leadership.
Mr. Singh,
that's
you
not gonna
love
make things
that
better.
line about taking Indigenous
not
kids
a
to
line.
court. It's
What?
actually not true. We have
Trudeau,
committed to compensating
say that?
those
You can't- you
kids
can't
who went
say
through
that.
that.
Listen,
and what's
seriously, you
more
can't
than
say
that,
that.
this is important, Mr.
No, you
Singh.
can't say you're not
When
taking them
you
to court
talk
when you're
about-
taking them to court.
When you talk
there
about
are kids out there
how
that are being
assess.
fought by you in court.
Leaders,
Just
I
can't
would
say that.
actually remind you the question
say
is
that.
about violence against Indigenous women and girls. Let me recenter you on that.
I appreciate it because he can't continue to say that. That
Well,
doesn't make any sense.
and Ms. Curl, I will say again, I said this last night in the French debate, this is why we need more diversity in politics. This is why we need people who are most directly impacted by issues to be able to speak for themselves, because we are drifting off into things. We have only dedicated 2 minutes to talking about how we are going to bring true justice to Indigenous women in this country. If we can
Ms.
stick
Curl,
to the topic.
Mr. Trudeau.
Ms. Curl, on this topic, and it was brought up in the earlier one, and we talked about Indigenous women, I want to talk about those kids buried in unmarked graves across the country, because it was a tragedy for all Canadians, one long known by Indigenous peoples. But when I went to Cowessess to speak with Chief Cadmus Delorme, we not only grieved those kids, we signed an agreement, a landmark agreement, to keep kids at risk in their communities, to take them out of the provincial system. That is how we move forward. It took years to sign that agreement, but we got it, and we are empowering Indigenous communities
Mr.
to
Trudeau,
care for
we're
their
out
own
of
kids.
time. Mr. Singh, I'm going to give you very brief moment to
I
respond.
mean, for the most part, to me,
We need to implement all the calls to justice. We need to listen to Indigenous women and girls. We need to make sure that they're safe, and we have the steps that they've laid out that we need to follow.
for me, what Trudeau's saying about, like, oh, we need to let the communities handle themselves, that to me sounds like he's saying, oh yeah, we just need to, like, do nothing.
Direct question on our theme of reconciliation.
I'm not gonna lie, that's what that sounds like to me.
Melissa is to Mr. Blanchet. Over to you.
Tanshe, thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to be here with you to.
Then again, I really don't know enough about Indigenous issues. My dad is,
Government reports, including in Quebec, have sounded.
he's been the majority of what I've been hearing about Indigenous issues, and he's just like, oh yeah, they've all fucked up. I'm like, all right, I need to study this on my own, and then I don't. So that's my fault. But hey,
to address
like he does some good old-fashioned racism.
First, never underestimate the weight, the sadness of those dramas. Second, I acknowledge, I recognize the existence of systemic racism in June 2020. And then, what happened? It became a political tool against Quebec. It became a tool to say Quebec is this and that and racist and xenophobic and all of that. Instead of opening a discussion, trying to find solution, consulting experts, discussing with the First Nations themselves, it became this white society against this other one, white society. We build nothing. So the words became toxic. I'm absolutely open to the idea of discussing all of that on a quiet stage without this aggressivity, being aggressive as this debate has become.
All right, Mr. Blanchette, we have to move on. Your next question, Melissa.
This question's for you, Ms. Paul. Canada has more children in government custody right now than at the height of residential schools.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know enough. I would point you right now to the serfs. They probably got way better discussion about Indigenous people. Like, they've done interviews with like Indigenous leaders in Canada.
What would you do
better than me, that's for sure.
to make sure that poverty and trauma issues are addressed?
Thank you very much for that question, and absolutely, we mentioned that not that long ago in one of our statements that the residential school system had been replaced by children in care, and that this was just perpetuating the legacy of trauma. It really comes back to what I said before, which is that the Indigenous leadership is there. It is ready to guide all of these processes. We have all of the recommendations we need. What we are missing is political will. What we are missing is those who have been in power for a very long time, making space for new voices and diverse voices. I actually had to pull my jaw up, which just dropped, when I heard what Mr. Blanchette said. I invited Mr. Blanchette to get educated about systemic discrimination. I extend that invitation again. I would be happy to educate him.
It's nice to want to educate
This is my time, sir.
It is.
Thank you.
Oh.
It was not an insult. It was an invitation to educate yourself.
This is Leader Direct Questions.
There
Melissa,
should
you're
be some
Mr.
decency
Blanchette.
in this debate. Since I'm many minutes behind everybody else, there should be some
Mr.
decency
Blanchette, you
in
have
the
had
debate.
every opportunity to
It's
jump
your
in an open
responsibility,
debate.
not mine, but something.
Fulfilling my responsibility, sir. Melissa, we're going to keep moving on.
Is
Your
it my
next
turn?
It is your turn.
Well, thank you. Mr. Trudeau, this is for you. You know, your Liberal government has turned Indian affairs into two separate, massive bureaucracies that eat up large portions of funding that will never see it on to reserve. It doesn't leave the bureaucracy. You've promised clean drinking water, but billions of dollars later, that's not happened. Many still do not have clean drinking water. You know, Canadians and Indigenous people are losing patience with the lack of results from all of this spending. So I guess the question is, why would they believe you a third term?
It is quite entertaining.
You would be accountable for all that spending.
One of the enemies of progressive politics, Melissa, is cynicism. Is discounting the hard work that millions of people have been involved in over the past years. And yes, there's always more to do. Progressives always know there's more to do. But when we came into office, there were 105 long-term boil water advisories. We lifted 109 of them, and for each of the ones that are remaining, we have a project lead, a project team, and an action plan, and we're going to lift those all. There are tens of thousands of kids across this country, Indigenous kids, who've started the school year in new schools or refurbished schools. We have moved forward on settling more agreements and more land claims and more partnerships than any other government over the years. We continue to work in partnership and respect and invest more money in Indigenous communities than any previous government. And no, we're not done yet.
I think the money, I don't think anybody's questioning the money spent. I think that they're questioning the results for the money that's spent. Federal forces, including the RCMP and the
She's badass. Who is she?
have been used throughout Canada's history to prevent First Nations from exercising their treaty rights to fish and to hunt and to defend land and water. This is happening right now on both coasts, including under the NDP party. in British Columbia with regards to fishing and logging. So my question would be to you, as Prime Minister, what would you do to ensure Indigenous rights and title are finally respected in this country?
I really appreciate the question. First of all, we need to respect Indigenous treaty land and rights. That's a fundamental step towards walking the path of reconciliation in a real meaningful way. But you mentioned the RCMP, and I got to talk about the really sad reality that there's been violence, heavy-handed violence against Indigenous communities, against peaceful protesters, and I have long called for reform of policing. When I was in the provincial level, I fought against carting. I've continued to use every platform I have to say, we've got to stop the use of force, we've got to overview it, we've got to change the RCMP's mandate, and that's something we can do at the federal level. That's something that Mr. Trudeau said he would do and yet has yet to do, and it's something I'm committed to making sure happens.
Mr. O'Toole, next question is for you. You know, you voted against the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People that would share decision-making power with Indigenous people over what happens on their land, and you also want to criminalize Indigenous dissent that's expressed through blockades or protests. So the question is, if you're Prime Minister, how could Canada build a respectful nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous people?
Thank you, Ms. Ridgen. And this goes very similar to Mr. McLeod's question on trust and respect. I want to build those partnerships. And that's why our only concern with the United Nations Declaration was how free and prior informed consent was defined so that it didn't stop partnerships from being formed. I'm really glad to say one of the early leaders behind the UN Declaration, Chief Willie Littlechild, has agreed to serve as a special counsel to me on the implementation of that to make sure that there are partnerships and opportunities. What I want to do as Prime Minister is build that type of nation-to-nation dialogue and partnership so that the next generation has intergenerational wealth and opportunity transfer, not trauma. And building that trust will be core to me. It's why, as I said, my first question was on reconciliation. We have to make progress.
All right.
I don't know what anybody's saying anymore. I'm out of it, dude.
I will be here to do my best to keep you on time, and all of you have an opportunity to jump in after Mr. Trudeau begins with a question from Melissa.
Okay, I think if there's one thing that Canadians and Indigenous people can all agree upon, it is that this Indian Act system is not working for anybody. How would you dismantle this broken top-down system?
Indian Act. All right, let's see what this is.
That would ensure that Canada still is living up to its constitutional obligations to Indigenous people.
First of all, we are looking forward to dismantling the Indian Act. It is a commitment of ours, but it is not something that Ottawa gets to decide. And what replacing will vary from community to community as we live up to our obligations. And that's why over the years, as we've moved towards self-government, we have accompanied communities, some who want to start with health, some who want to start with education, some who want to start with economic development. Every community, every nation across this country gets to help define what its path is forward. We will be there to listen, to partner, to build a better future every step of the way.
The way to go forward is to listen to leaders. And Mr. Trudeau ignored one that he had in his own cabinet, Jody Wilson-Raybould. That was a huge lost opportunity. We've been speaking to people with how we can accelerate treaty resolution. There are some treaty negotiations, Ms. Ridgen, that have been going on, as you probably know.
Yeah, I'm really tuning out to the Indigenous stuff because the Indian Act thing is literally like colonialism that's still here to this day, like full colonialist laws that have not gone away.
For Indigenous peoples
And
alongside
it's caused problems for many people. And like the fact that Trudeau hasn't gotten rid of everything to do with the Indian Act. I don't even like saying that fucking name of the bill. It's gross. It's so disappointing. And no one on this stage is going to get rid of it.
I spoke to B, who's a young woman, a young girl who lives in Niskandiga. And she told me in her own voice, she said, I'm a 12-year-old girl and I'm fighting for clean drinking water. How does that make any sense? those words haunt me to this day. I think about what 12-year-olds do, and they certainly aren't fighting for clean drinking water. That is a legacy. That is the impact of the Indian.
I want to go back to what Mr. O'Toole has been saying, because he's very able at saying all the right things, but there are countless examples of him actually not living up to his words. We've seen him on a number of times during this campaign, but on Indigenous issues specifically. He says we need to listen to Indigenous peoples. Well, he proposed that he would raise the flags that are at half-mast for the kids in unmarked graves in residential schools. And he didn't talk to or listen to any Indigenous leaders when he made that decision. And that's something that is important and symbolic, but wouldn't cost a cent. How do we believe that he would be able to actually make the investments necessary?
Hold on. I'm going to give
True.
Paul and Mr. Blanchet a chance to jump in. We haven't heard from them yet. Time permitting, I'll come back to you, Mr. O'Toole.
And I really again want to
I asked Mr. Trudeau to move immediately.
Hold on, Ms. Paul.
I really just want to try to recenter our conversation on Indigenous peoples and what we are going to do to fulfill the many unfulfilled promises and commitments that have been made. And I would say, perhaps to pick up on what has been said, that it seems all too often that reconciliation is treated like a buffet. You can opt in for this, pick this plate, but not the other one. And that applies to what we've seen with Mr. Trudeau and the Liberals. You can't, on the one hand, say reconciliation and then go and not allow Mi'kmaq fishers to be able to have a decent, moderate living for all of these years. You can't call reconciliation and then take Indigenous peoples to court. But Mr. Singh, you also can't say reconciliation and then support the NDP government in putting pipelines through Indigenous territories, or support Line 5 after the Anishinaabe made it very clear that they did not support that project.
Ms. Paul, I'm going to allow Mr. Blanchet to get in. He's been signaling he wants to.
Yes.
I will come back to the two of you. Mr. Blanchet.
First Nations and Quebec have something in common. They are binded by a document they never signed. And any relationship between nations should be dealt with freely signed treaties or agreements or something. The Indian Act has to be replaced one nation at a time, if need be, by and with freely signed treaties and agreement. There's no other way. And if I may come back a few seconds on something else. Quebec wants religion out of the state affairs because religion never protected equality for women and never will.
We are
What?
out of time. I'm going to give you both.
What the fuck? What? What? Hey, if I may, real quick, just come back on this completely different issue that you brought up an hour ago. We won't do religious equality for women. What the fuck?
To move forward on calls to action. Mr. Trudeau promises things, doesn't deliver, and then when people protested him, he mocked them. That is not reconciliation, so you can be as you strive.
Mr. O'Toole, Mr. Singh, briefly.
I think that Mr. Trudeau.
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm all loopy. I've had it. I may or may not have been sipping on some spicy water.
Is that Indigenous people continue to suffer, and that's what I want to stop. I want to stop the suffering.
Because this is it is very dry. I won't lie.
Mr. Trudeau, 5 seconds.
Unfortunately, the cynicism that Mr. Singh is showing.
Everyone just ignored the French guy. Fantastic.
We're moving forward. We have lots more to do, and we are doing it.
All right, leaders, thank you. Thank you, Melissa. Merci.
Trudeau's like, we have lots more to do. We have more to do. We're not done.
For the night, affordability.
Affordability. Okay. This is more my wheelhouse. Let's talk about this.
Senior working part-time in Burlington, Ontario. Good evening, Janet. Please tell us what your question is to the leaders.
All right.
My question is this: at my age, I never imagined that I would have to keep on working, but I have to afford to live where I do. So I'd like to know, when
Burlington.
I become Prime Minister,
Ooh.
what will they do to help us seniors survive?
Thank you, Janet. Leaders,
okay.
you've
We're not
heard
gonna talk about
Janet's
minimum wage
question.
yet, I guess.
We're starting with you, Mr. Blanchet.
Oh.
Merci, madame.
Easy pensions.
For many months now, the Bloc Québécois has
Well, that's not going to fix our problem, but
to increase the amount of money being provided
I mean,
on a monthly
the
basis.
big thing is free housing and just free money for the elderly.
In the Conservatives program, and in the Liberals program, it starts at 75, nothing below 75 for this pension. I'm not sure about the word in English. It has to be done. Those people are those who suffered the most from the pandemic. Their power to buy things was reduced. The fact that they were alone more than never before was made worse. And the stress, the anxiety they lived with is terrible. We want something to be done, and it has to start with a monthly check, seriously increased.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchet. Mr. O'Toole.
Thank you, Ms. Valla, for the question. This is a crisis facing our country. Affordability.
What's
and
he
it's
gonna do?
hitting our seniors
What's he
the
gonna do?
hardest.
What's he gonna
That's
do?
why in Canada's recovery plan, our plan to give you a break, we're going to double the Canada Workers Benefit. There are many seniors like you having to work to keep up with the cost of living. We're going to double that for you to give you a break. We're going to get bills down for internet, for cellular phone. We're going to get
How?
grocery bills down.
How?
That is our plan and our commitment. And in December, we're going to give you a break with the GST holiday and help bricks and mortar stores in the process. Mr. Trudeau is borrowing every day $424 million, and he's causing an inflation crisis. We have to secure.
He's not.
And that's our commitment to
The
you.
dollar's up.
Mr. O'Toole, Mr. Trudeau.
Ms. Fallish, thank you so much for your question. We know that seniors have been deeply affected by this pandemic, the isolation, the extra costs, which is why we stepped up with a one-time support so you could help get through this pandemic. But we need longer-term supports. One of the first things we did was increase the guaranteed income supplement for our most vulnerable single seniors when we first got elected. We're doing
The dollar's higher than it's been in 4 years or 6 years.
also moving forward with increasing the OAS for all seniors over 75 because we recognize that the costs continue to increase as
I'd like to point out as well, Trudeau here is at least proposing policies. O'Toole said, I like those things. Those seem good. I'm going to help you. Also, Trudeau bad.
have your backs as we have through this pandemic and into the future.
Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. Mr. Singh.
I want to thank you so much for your question. And one of the things that you mentioned is that you didn't think you would have to keep on working. And I don't think our seniors should have to work. If seniors want to contribute by working, that's absolutely their right. But you shouldn't have had to work. And in a country as rich as ours, we should make sure our seniors are able to retire with dignity.
Yes.
They've
Yes.
got
Yes.
the supports necessary to live a life of dignity. So what we're proposing to do is put in place a guaranteed income for seniors. So
Yes.
they can live with dignity and not have to worry about paying the bills. That's a starting point. What we've seen so far is that Mr. Trudeau and Mr. O'Toole both are going to either cut the help that you receive or put the burden back on people like you.
Yes.
We believe that the ultra-rich should pay their fair share for once
Yes.
and invest in you, invest in families, invest in people.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Ms. Paul.
Thank you very, very much for the question. And as someone who comes from a family where my grandma and grandfather had to work until actually they were kicked out of working because they needed to keep working to afford the basics, I completely understand what you're saying. And this is an opportunity for us to learn the lessons from this pandemic and to really get to the heart of things and to stop talking about the symptoms, but get to the root causes.
Capitalism.
Absolutely. And it's so wonderful to see the consensus building around a guaranteed livable income so that whatever your circumstances, you can live with dignity. We need universal long-term care. That's a huge expense. It was for my family. And we need more affordable housing. Let's get to the root causes.
Thank you, Ms. Paul. Mr. Singh and Mr. Blanchet, you will both square off now. You both talk about affordable housing, but we know that affordability means different things to different people depending on where in the country they live. So when you talk about affordable housing, who are you really talking about? Per the draw, Mr. Singh, you begin. Mr. Blanchet, you may jump in anytime.
We're talking about people who are spending right now more than half their income on housing. That's not affordable. People should not be spending so much on housing that they have no money left to pay for their groceries, to pay for their bills. And the sad reality is, since 2015 to now, the average cost of housing nationally has gone up to buy a home by $300,000. So far, the housing crisis has gotten worse over the past 6 years. We want to invest in housing. We want to invest to make it easier to buy your first home and to invest to make sure there's available, affordable rental homes.
Let Mr. Blanchette respond.
Could anyone tell me how to translate logement social?
Social housing.
Social housing might be a solution to another problem. People are paying, at least in Quebec, people are paying far too much for houses because the prices have increased tremendously.
I'm sorry, did he just say social housing?
Is to reduce the speed of that increase while helping people who cannot even afford decent lodging. If we build more social lodging, which price are obviously very lower, much lower, then it will lessen the pressure on those houses.
Wait, why is he based?
Expensive. And it will help reduce this. I wouldn't speak about an inflation crisis, but I would speak about an inflation worry.
Holy shit!
Must have at present times. So I believe one thing might be part of the solution.
Oh, okay. Never mind, he's not light fascist. I thought he was light fascist. Okay. What the fuck?
You speak about inflation, Mr. Blanchette, and that brings us to our next topic. So, Mr. O'Toole, Mr. Trudeau, and Ms. Hall, you're up. Inflation is at its highest level in
okay. The Separatist Party is literally the only party to bring up social housing.
Struggling to make ends meet. Per the draw, you begin, Mr. O'Toole.
Well, unlike Mr. Trudeau, I will care about monetary policy because we need to keep inflation low.
I like this song. Fuck you.
Hitting families, and Mr. Trudeau seems completely oblivious to that. Bills are going up. There's a housing crisis, as we talked about, and he's making it worse with, as I said, almost $500 million of borrowing per day. There's real risks on the horizon. So we have a plan to get people work, get their bills down, give them a break. Canadians deserve a break and balance the budget over the course of the next decade. That's exactly what we need to fight against Mr. Trudeau's inflation.
Try not to
give families a break.
Anyone.
Ms. Paul.
Try not to interrupt anyone. You know, it's just an excellent question. And if you come to my neighborhood of Toronto Centre, you will see those people living in inadequate housing. You will see people paying more than half of their income just for things like childcare. And you know, there's this expression in my culture where you talk about soon come. It's the things that you delay to tomorrow and tomorrow that should have been done today. This is soon come. Soon come is now. We have got to learn the lessons of the pandemic and make sure that we have a social safety net in place that lets everyone live with dignity. When we invest in our people, we are investing in our future, and this is the time for us to do that. It costs us not to do it.
Over the past year and a half, I made a straightforward promise to Canadians that we would have your backs. And that's what we did. During this pandemic, we were there to support people. But at the same time, we need to continue that. That's why we've put forward a $10 a day childcare proposal that will save the average family in Toronto close to $10,000 more than Mr. O'Toole's approach on childcare, which he would cancel. We also put forward a national housing plan that will invest $4 billion to work with municipalities to create 1.4 million homes. Mr. O'Toole's
I'm still reeling that the Bloc Québécois were the only party to bring up social housing.
Plan on housing gives $500 million on breaks to the wealthiest landlords and nothing for building new houses.
The housing crisis has gotten worse under Mr. Trudeau, and months ago he fought against us trying to take foreign non-resident money out of our housing market. We've got a plan to get rental housing built. We've got a plan to get density, 1 million new homes in the next 3 years,
with no
and
money
to give
on that
first-time home buyers
not a cent
a break by a
Mr.
longer
O'Toole.
mortgage. And Mr. Trudeau, Canadians are worried you're going to be taxing their primary home sale. Your advisors have said it.
Untrue.
Your candidates have said it. It's on
untrue.
page 14 of his policy book. He's introducing a new tax on the sale of homes.
Leaders, there will be more opportunity to speak about these issues. Thank you, because guess what? I'm bringing out Rosemary Barton of CBC News, and she's going to be asking you more direct questions.
Guess what? Here's another griller, motherfucker.
On this theme of affordability. Hey, Rosie?
Hey, Shanti, thanks, and good to see everybody. Appreciate you being here. Let's try and get some answers this time, shall we? Ms. Paul, I'll start with you. One of the plans that you've laid out to tackle affordability is a guaranteed livable income. You mentioned it just moments ago. Give people a set amount of money to deal with their lives. There was an expert panel in British Columbia just recently that said that that is not the way forward, that actually is too complicated for the needs of our society, that the needs are too diverse. Why do you think this is still a policy worth pursuing?
Guaranteed livable income is a policy whose time has come. We saw at the beginning of the pandemic how many people were thrown immediately into financial crisis because our patchwork system simply isn't working. There is a growing consensus. The members of the Liberal Party voted for it at their convention. The members of the NDP party voted it at their convention. 50 senators signed a letter calling for it. The time has come to ensure that everyone has the support that they need to live in dignity in this country. The parliamentary budget officer looked at guaranteed livable income. He examined the model in Ontario, and here's what he said. He said that it would lift half of the people who are in poverty now out of it, that it was affordable, and that it would not disincentivize work. This is the time for a guaranteed livable income. Let's do it together.
That's time. Thank you.
Mr. O'Toole, childcare, as you know, is a huge expense for families. You would scrap the deals that the Liberals have made with provinces, which drops fees by 50% immediately and creates spaces, and eventually will reduce fees to $10. Instead, you're proposing a tax credit that would reimburse just some families $6,000 a year. So what does your plan do to create spaces and lower fees? Because as you know here, it's not just about affordability, but also about access.
It's about helping all families now, not in 5 years helping some. And our plan would help lower income families with up to 75% of the cost. Our plan will also help that nurse on shift schedules that has jobs in the evening, that needs flexibility. What we want to do is help all families get ahead and provide more support.
I may have to. Oh, Jesus.
As much flexibility as possible. If there's not one in her suburban community, there is no space in 5 years under Mr.
I'm looking at the disk space. I may or may not have to reboot stream.
They're in now to have ability to help them in their circumstances. Our plan will be immediate. It will help all Canadian families.
Mr. Singh, you're promising to tackle skyrocketing housing prices. One of the ways is with that 20% tax on the sale of homes to foreign buyers. 2/3 of Canadian families actually own a home already. If you're successful at cooling the housing market, that would mean that people who have invested their life savings in their homes may not have it anymore. They're relying on that for their retirement. So what is more important to you? Helping younger people get access to the market, or allowing older Canadians who rely on the value of their homes to live?
It's a really fair question. And when I spoke to people,
Old people can get a fucking job.
my riding at Burnaby, people who've got beautiful homes, I asked them, what's the number one concern? They say housing. And I kind of look around at their house and say, well, you've got a home. They say, well, I'm not worried for myself. I've got a place, but I'm worried about my kids. And they're more concerned that their kids will never be able to find a home than their own circumstances because they're okay. They are worried about their kids, and the reality is it is impossible for young people to even imagine buying a home.
Here's what would solve. Okay, no, this wouldn't solve any problem. But here's how the elderly should deal with this problem of like, hey, if the housing market, if like all of a sudden there's this affordable housing and I can't really, sell my $1 million home. The old people should get a fucking job.
Is that they're not sure they're ever going to be able to own a home. We want to change.
They shouldn't be landlords. They shouldn't be, giving out mortgages or not giving out mortgages. People shouldn't be just giving them money for a house. Housing should be free, and the old people, if they can't survive, while they're old, they lived a nice life, but also they can get a job like the rest of us.
That older seniors are less likely to have employment income, and
they will be able to survive.
So why should an income?
Oh God, I'm a little bit drunk. I'm a little bit too drunk for this now, but it's fine.
First, let's say that this prime minister is supposed to be the champion who fights against all kinds of discrimination, and it did create himself two classes of elder seniors. What they want is for those between 65 and 75 to spend their private funds. in the meantime.
No, but I've just given you the example about why. I've just
will,
given you the example about why the government may have done that, sir. It's because people
may
who
I
are 65 to
propose my own
75.
answer, please?
May I follow up, please? That those people generally stay employed and generally have fewer health costs.
Those people have worked all their lives until 65 years old. They have paid for a pension.
Well, they've worked 40 years.
For everybody. And for some
about 50 years, but you know.
Financial issues, the government creates two classes of seniors. It is unacceptable, and no calculation whatsoever should be so unethical.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blanchet. We are now moving to the open debate
I just have a
section.
question for Mr. Trudeau, I believe.
I'm very sorry.
If you don't mind. I don't think we should let him off the hook. I think we would all agree.
I got a little mixed up there.
Making some of our arguments on the other ones.
Well, we'll make you uncomfortable now, sir.
There we go.
You said in 2019 that Canadians should never have to make the, and these are your words, impossible choice between paying for medications or putting food on the table. We have seen you, particularly in these recent months, willing to spend billions of dollars on programs that matter to your government. Daycare would be another example of that. Why is there no money in your platform or in your most recent budget for a national pharmacare program? Is it no longer a priority? And should you not just tell Canadians that, sir?
No, it continues to be a priority because, indeed, no one should have to choose between paying for groceries and medications. On health investments, we were all focused on COVID-19 and supporting the provinces and making sure that on that we were giving the support we needed so we could have Canadians' backs. But at the same time, we worked with a number of different jurisdictions, and we've actually signed with Prince Edward Island a national universal pharmacare.
You've signed one deal, sir, but there's nothing in your
there's
nothing in your platform in terms of costing. I understand the pandemic kept you busy. What about going forward? Why wouldn't you put
going
that in
forward?
place?
We are going to continue to, but we know that it's not
is
something
not do.
We did with Prince Edward Island. We're going to continue to do with others in respect of the provincial jurisdiction that is delivery of health care. We can't impose pharmacare on a province that doesn't want it, unlike the NDP proposes. We are going to work in partnership, as we have on so many things, to get it done like we did on childcare.
Okay, and now we're going to move to open debate. Starting back with you, Rosie.
Okay, and we start here, I believe, with Mr. Blanchet.
Yeah. That's correct.
So, Mr. Blanchet, what is one policy change that you think would make the biggest difference?
Socialized housing.
to
Socialized
Canadians,
housing.
Or Quebecers, in your case, in terms of their cost of living? The one change that you would like to see that would help them the most?
Cost of living, that's quite interesting because that's a worry that we have. We believe that the most important thing is changing the way we create wealth. We believe that transforming our own resources, natural resources, with our own clean energy in our regions of Quebec will create more wealth. This wealth will come from an environmental, I will get this word, environmental preoccupation as well. And we will do that, and we should be entitled to do that with our part of the money that is being sent again and again in oil and gas. There's one thing I want to add, even if it's not exactly, I don't know if there's time eventually.
Not really, but quickly.
I will take a few of those seconds.
Yes.
Will we have some seconds to speak about French-speaking communities and Acadians?
Well, not in this
debate?
section. This is about cost of living, sir.
And to you, Mr.
It's
Singh.
nowhere. That's my problem. It's nowhere.
One of the things we know, the cost of living has gone up. The cost of medication is going up. The cost of being able to afford the medication.
He brought up socialized housing once, and he was just like, "Oh, that sounds like a good idea," and then never touched it again.
You've shown your evidence with your costed budget. You've shown Canadians clearly you've got no interest in doing something that you promised to do
in your
2 years ago.
Mr. Singh.
You promised to do it 2 years ago. You committed. You campaigned on it. You included it in your throne speech, and now you've completely abandoned it. How can people trust any promise you make when there's $0 in your plan?
Okay, brief response, then Ms. Paul, then I'm coming to you, Mr. O'Toole. Briefly, Mr. Paul.
$25 billion in our fully costed platform for health for the priorities that Canadians have told us on. Better support for seniors in care, better support for mental health services across the country, particularly for young people, and access to a primary care doctor or team. That is what $25 billion over the next 4 years gives. Mr. O'Toole's money for health is backloaded to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years from now.
All right, Mr. Trudeau, thank you, Ms. Paul.
I'm reminded what the question was. The question was what policy would have the biggest impact on people's cost of living.
Ms. Paul.
And I think that we have a perfect example of this again here, because the biggest thing that could make a difference in the cost of living for people is a change in the culture in Ottawa. It is so painful for me because I've had the experience of, again, having my grandparents work until they were 75 and living 600 and 800 square feet and wondering how we were going to feed ourselves some nights. I've had that experience, and I know that one day of delay is too much. So when I think that we could have being in Parliament now, working to get people the help that they need.
What is the policy, Ms. Paul? These are anecdotes. What is the policy was the question.
It's not an anecdote. The thing that we need is a change in the culture.
I hear you. I see you, Mr.
It's a change in the culture because there are several parties on this platform right now that agree on guaranteed livable income and universal pharmacare and childcare. But it's always soon come. It's always soon come.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Paul. Mr. O'Toole, you've been waiting. I'm going to get you in.
We're doubling the Canadian workers' benefit. That amounts to $1 per hour raise for working families. These are people working very hard, and I respect whether they get up to work.
I hear white people in his voice. I hear him say, oh, you know, we're getting white Canadian families. And I'm like, oh, so white people in suburbia, right?
Only party with a recovery plan that includes all Canadians. And when it comes to cynicism that Mr. Trudeau talked about earlier, all of the commitments continue to be a priority. He's going to get to the calls to action. He's going to have transparency. He's going to make targets. He announces things and never delivers. Mr. Trudeau, a prime minister has to deliver on the words. Kind of true. Not just fancy words to make
kind of true. Kind of true.
Take promises from you on making promises and not following up. When we see you're beholden to the gun lobby, we're holding to anti-vaxxers.
Remember, this is affordability.
Hey, we're
out of time now,
I've
sir.
been responding to people. Can I answer Rosie's question directly?
You have 5 seconds, sir.
We were able to lift 1 million people out of poverty and create 1 million jobs at the same time with the right kinds of investments over the past 5 years.
And Mr. Trudeau, I'm sorry, sir, I have to wrap you right there because it is now time for our next theme on COVID recovery.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, COVID recovery is an easy one. Nations that actually give a shit, like a Democrat-run United States, like South Korea, like Japan, like Europe, like maybe the UK, we'll just forgive COVID debt, or we can just like print money and pay for COVID debt.
Coming out of this pandemic, how will you, if elected as Prime Minister, going to unify and drive Canada forward with respect to healthcare, jobs in the economy, and ensuring a higher quality of life is achievable for all Canadians, regardless of race, color, creed, or sexual orientation?
All right, leaders, you've heard from Ethan. Mr. O'Toole, you're up first.
Thank you, Mr. Herman. That is exactly why I launched Canada's recovery plan on the first day of the campaign. We're going to create 1 million jobs in 1 year. We're going to clean up the accountability mess in Ottawa. We're going to have national leadership on mental health. We're going to be more ready for a pandemic, and we're going to get our finances under control. I want to get people...
What is he going to do for all of these things? It's always the devil's in the details with these conservative policies.
Whatever your background, your faith, your color, your sexual orientation, whether you're Indigenous, whether you're a new Canadian...
Also, he's abandoned his base, by the way. I'm listening to this debate, and I'm like, actually, he might not win.
Ask you to look at Canada's recovery plan. After these 18 months as a country, we need a plan and a leader that will actually deliver.
Thank you, Ms. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Herman. And I swear I did not line up that question. He's not a ringer. But this really comes
what?
to
I didn't
the heart
suspect
of the matter,
that. What?
Again, is about changing the culture of politics in Ottawa. We have heard from outgoing MPs in the last parliament how incredibly important that is, that the culture has become toxic, that has become...
She's a little sus.
And, you know, there used to be a time, I worked as an intern in a nonpartisan way in the Ontario legislature. You know, you would make a fuss and question period, and then you'd get to work across party lines and committees to find the solutions to help people in Canada. And so we need less partisanship. we need more diverse voices so that we can get the access to the best ideas in a more cooperative and collaborative way.
Mr. Singh.
Thank you. Mr. Herman, thank you for your question. And your question touched on a number of things. Healthcare is something very near and dear to my heart. And we've seen in this pandemic that our healthcare system simply hasn't been there. And it's not because of the pandemic. A lot of these problems were there from before. So our commitment is to invest in our healthcare system, to defend it. Unlike Mr. Trudeau and Mr. O'Toole, who believe in private long-term care delivery, we want to get out profit, get out the greed from the delivery of long-term care. We want to invest in pharmacare for all, not promise it in 2019 and then have $0 to commit towards it. We want to see everyone have access to medication. We want to include dental care into our healthcare system and mental health services. And to do all that, we want to make sure that the billionaires start paying their fair share.
Yes.
So we can invest in you.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay, so here's the thing I'm noticing. He's saying a lot about how the billionaires need to pay their fair share. One criticism the NDP has always faced is that they don't actually really know how to run an economy. Because the last time there was a nationwide NDP leader, it actually didn't turn out that great. Now, I don't know the history on that. I'm getting that from my parents because I still need to research Canadian history in that regard.
This pandemic, and unfortunately,
but he's not bringing up stuff like expanding healthcare, he does talk about full childcare, and he does talk about a living wage.
Candidates to get vaccinated
kind of
to 90%. We have to get through this. We are unequivocal that vaccinations are the way to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. Mr. Blanchette.
But I don't actually see Singh going far enough on certain issues. I don't like that.
Healthcare is a jurisdiction of the provinces and Quebec. Those are the territories, the jurisdictions who should have the resources to do their job. The promises of the Conservatives is 3.5% of increase a year for the first 3 years, which is very far from what the provinces asked for. And what the provinces asked for is not even in the program of Mr. Trudeau. So it will be hard to be efficient if those who are responsible of healthcare do not have the resources which are owed to them.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchette. Thanks, Ethan, for your question. Have a good night. We're going to let you go. It is now time, Ms. Paul and Mr. Singh, to go face-to-face, starting with Ms. Paul. And I want to talk about Canada's parallel pandemic, the opioid crisis. Since it has taken hold, more than 20,000 Canadians have died, often in the shadows. This is an insidious killer
easy answer. Nationalize pharmacare.
Both of you, starting with Ms. Paul.
That way we can regulate. That way we can regulate opioids far better than the private sector.
The last session of Parliament, across party lines again, for us to first recognize that this was a national health emergency, and then to decriminalize simple possession, because we know we need to end the stigma and create a national safe supply program. We asked every party to do it because 17 lives on average are being lost every day. We didn't hear anything from anyone, and it comes back to Mr. Herman's question about unity. Can we not unify on something like this where it's clear what we need to do? If we can't do that, then none of these other things are possible, and so that's what we have to try to do.
We definitely need to respond to this crisis.
Oh shit! Hello. We're gonna play some games after this. Also, what's cracking? How long was that sent? Oh god, I have no idea how long ago that was actually sent because OBS is frozen.
The approach of arresting someone, putting them
no, unfortunately, I'm gonna have to go to bed basically right after this. But yeah, sometimes I do the politics stream.
So we have been saying, and I believe very firmly, we need to provide healthcare responses.
This is my country. This is what's going on with me.
So safe supply. We need to look at the evidence and say really clearly if there is any step we can take.
I might play some games tomorrow though. I don't know what's going on after that.
That is exactly the question. Is there the political will?
Maybe tomorrow. I'm not sure. Well, maybe next time.
We need a national safe supply program. We wanted it before Parliament dissolved, and here we are. And lives will be lost in my riding of Toronto Centre probably today because of it.
All right, Ms. Paul, I have to wrap you there. It's good to hear, Mr. Singh, that it is at least coming from you. Mr. Trudeau, Mr. Blanchette.
I'm not going to lie. I blanked out on literally everything that they said.
Mr. Trudeau, During the pandemic, Canadians watched in horror the suffering of their most vulnerable and frail loved ones in long-term care. What if tomorrow you had to place a family member in a long-term care facility? Would you do it? Beginning with you, Mr. Trudeau, Mr. O'Toole, Mr. Blanchet, you may jump in.
Tomorrow is my mom's 73rd birthday, so that is certainly something we're reflecting on, but she's doing wonderfully right now. We won't have to make that decision right now. Don't worry, Mom. The reality is we've heard from seniors across this country who've been tremendously worried through this pandemic, and family members worried about that. We know that the conditions of work for the people who are in those long-term care homes are often dictating the conditions of care for seniors, which is why we propose to hire 50,000 new personal support workers working with the provinces with the money for that. Also increasing the minimum salary to $25 an hour for people who care for our elders and most vulnerable. Because
so if you had to put mom
happens.
In long-term care, you would do it?
I would make sure that, yes, that they are people who are...
Okay, we got a yes.
And that there is enough of a proportionate.
Mr.
And that's where we will work with the provinces to deliver exactly that, because we put real money forward.
Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. Mr. O'Toole.
This is where we need partnerships for long-term care for the CHSLD in Quebec. We're going to have a $3 billion fund that the provinces can draw on for infrastructure upgrades to long-term care. That's in addition to our record, almost $60 billion commitment over 10 years to the public healthcare system. Universal access with no conditions. We need to partner with the provinces, not create fights. And long-term care, learning from the gaps in the first part of this pandemic is something we need. And I have to address...
Would you put a loved one in long-term care tomorrow,
Absolutely. I have
Mr.
a
O'Toole?
grandmother in one.
Okay.
And we've been...
All right. He's gonna say yes, so never mind. Trudeau's yes means literally nothing.
We have to get through the pandemic first. Why did you not have that approach to the election, Mr. Trudeau? We're in the fourth wave. Everything in the recovery relates to getting out of the pandemic first. Why didn't we work
Mr. Blanchet, I'm going to let Mr. Blanchet in.
You have had 4 minutes more than I did. So now I think it's enough. The debate is almost over. Some dads and some moms don't have to worry. They will have the money, of course. Some do. And in order to give them the care they need, the care they deserve, those responsible for those cares, provinces and Quebec, should have, without conditions, because it is their responsibility, their knowledge, their expertise, the resources required. When the Army came in Quebec, they wrote a report afterward. What did they say? They did not say Quebec is not good enough to take care of its seniors. They said they lacked resources. They lacked the money.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchet. Leaders, we are starting to get at. We're running out of time. I am sorry, Mr. Trudeau. You've had the most time tonight. I'm sorry, Mr. Trudeau. We are now moving on to our final journalist of the night. I am welcoming Evan Solomon from CTV.
Fuck him right up.
He's going to be putting questions to you on COVID recovery, starting with Mr. Singh. Hey, Evan.
Hi, Shachi, and hi, leaders. Good to see all of you. Mr. Singh, I'll start with you, sir. Your pandemic recovery plan is uncosted. You have no plan to balance the books, but you promised to pay for your expensive promises, new programs like universal dental care with taxing the super rich and taxing...
Oh, we're not going to balance the... Okay, that's a...
What specifically would you do to create the 1 million jobs you're promising and make sure Canada stays competitive?
We have the only credible plan that's not going to cut help to Canadians, that's not going to put the burden back on the same people that have struggled. We're the only ones on this debate table now can say clearly we would tax the billionaires. We would make sure companies like Amazon start paying their fair share so we can invest in those new jobs, so we can invest in people.
I might go over this debate again because this is actually like... There's some interesting things that I need to look into and some topics I actually want to talk about on stream.
Cutting help to people.
But what new programs, sir, specifically?
Well, I believe in making sure we invest in pharmacare, we invest in dental care, we invest in retrofitting homes and buildings. In doing this, we're going to lower the cost of living, help people save money, but also create jobs by investing in the future economy, the economy of the future.
All right. Mr. Trudeau, to you. Only 4 months ago, you released A budget that was billed as a pandemic recovery program, a plan that had $101 billion of new spending. Since then, COVID numbers are up, growth numbers are down. Now you got a new plan that adds $78 billion of new spending, essentially rendering your last budget out of date. How do Canadians trust that these new massive spending promises will not just keep growing in another few months? And what do you say to the next generation who say, how are we going to pay for this?
Well, first of all, I made a promise during this pandemic to have people's backs.
So how we're gonna? Okay, so I really, I don't. Trudeau's answer is gonna be dog shit. This is a specifically racial issue. Now I need to explain this. When Conservatives bring up specifically the debt and the deficit, what they like to do is they like to cut care and they like to cut services. These services being cut disproportionately affect minorities. So in Canada, that would be Black people and Indigenous people, as well as immigrants. In America, that's Black people, you know, and other, like Mexicans and other immigrants.
Debt of our country as proportion of the GDP.
The debt is not an issue for normal Canadians. Like, the national debt is not an issue for normal Canadians. It's just not. It's such a wildly different issue. It's like the debt is being spent on military weapons and political funds and, you know, lobbyists or lobbying. And so many, like, wild things that you and I could literally never spend money on, as well as the fact that they can just print more money.
Systems. How do you justify not supporting the...
So, like, the whenever it's brought up, you have to remember that this is being used as a crutch, as a scapegoat, as a way to scapegoat and a way to blame
mandatory
welfare programs for something that's like, you know, like a big scary boogeyman. It's a boogeyman being used to create excuses to, you know, defund programs that actually help people.
That everyone who can be vaccinated should be vaccinated. We need to encourage people to do it. Vaccine saves lives. And every single person on the stage...
And that's all anybody needs to say about vaccines. It's like, it literally just do it, dumbass.
Vaccinated for certain reasons, and we have to reasonably accommodate them. We will always be guided by the science. We will never put partisan concerns ahead of public health.
Mr. O'Toole, you promise a $60 billion increase in healthcare transfers over the next 10 years, but according to the Independent Parliamentary Budget Officer...
Why was O'Toole not asked about vaccines?
Next 5 years, which is not much different than the...
Interesting.
But you also support private-public synergies, in your words. Can you specify here tonight exactly what kinds of private healthcare innovations you want to see more of? And if a province introduces more private health care, would you enforce the Canada Health Act by holding back any of your promised funding?
I 100% support our public and universal system. I've said it's paramount. And after COVID-19, we need to rebuild...
Two-tiered systems don't fucking work.
...plan to do that. 6% increase per year, stable, predictable, without conditions funding to partner with our provinces. We will respect them running and putting priorities to get wait times down, to give more choice for universal public access. That's what we need. On top of that, Evan, we have a substantial commitment in mental health and treatment for addiction. There are going to be lingering aspects from this pandemic that we're going to do in addition.
But just,
the provinces are in charge of their system. We will respect that. Public and universal elements need to be at the core of our system, and our investments will save it and give relief to front lines like our nurses, physicians. Mr. Trudeau doesn't hire those people.
Just for time.
All
right, we got to wrap you, Mr. O'Toole.
I really don't want him to get the election win.
Life-saving vaccines and key programs like the CERB. And as you mentioned, the Canadian Armed Forces came in to save people in long-term care homes in the province of Quebec. Some believe this crisis has enforced the...
Just his policies on fucking healthcare are the scariest thing. Because he will create a two-tiered system. He is fucking dedicated to creating a two-tiered healthcare system for some reason.
Enforce national standards.
I have still not heard from all those brilliant people all over the place and all over Canada what a Canadian can do that a Quebecer cannot do. In what way whatsoever would a Canadian norm be any better than a Quebec norm? I don't see that. And I'm not, you know, I don't have this complex. I don't feel that I'm any a lesser person than a
What is he talking
I'm
about?
a
Enforcing
Quebecer.
national standard. If you pay for something,
I'm
should you be able to
against
enforce it?
national norms or standards. And I would say that the Premier Legault of Quebec today said, no one is to be entirely trusted in this group of people. Some are worse than others. I think they recognize themselves. But even those who are a little bit less terrible need a watchdog because they're not entitled to a majority government. So, if Quebecers want, I will lead the watchdogs.
Okay. This is the open debate section.
What?
And I'll start with you.
Even she looks confused. he is sad. God, I think
All of the leaders here tonight.
I almost think he has like some decent like instincts on economic policy.
With some Canadians
But as the leader of the Bloc Québécois, he's like dedicated to just being piss.
and what will go in the next
So
and
interesting. Because he's literally the only one to bring up socialized housing, and he's had some based ass takes.
What we support
And like he had some base takes from the
labor shortages in Quebec, as we can't find
the talks about the Aboriginals, and
we need to target the highly impacted
that's interesting. Why? How even?
We get those tourism restaurants back on their feet, get people working, and with keeping cases low, we can then wind down.
I want him to run again for the Liberal Party or the NDP because he's kind of based.
Let Mr. Singh in,
for
Mr.
10 months.
Because I actually don't hate him.
Mr. O'Toole and Mr. Trudeau are jumping over each other about who is going to cut help to people first. I don't agree with that approach. I don't think it makes sense to say, oh, I'm going to have people's back, but I'm going to cut as quickly as I can. I'm going to cut the help to people who need it as much as they can. We're the only party right here clearly is going to say to you, you're not going to have to pay more. We're not going to cut any programs. We're going to ask the 44.
Singh, we're giving working Canadians.
Hold on a second.
We're
going to ask the 44 richest billionaires
Mr. Singh,
pay their fair share for
I
once.
think
That's what we're going to do.
Respond to that because this is the second time that Mr. Singh has said we're the only party where just us. Mr. Singh, you know that that's
hold on, Mr.
No,
Singh.
unless you're trying to ghost me, you know that.
You're right.
Okay.
Sure.
She's based too. Holy shit.
Thank you.
All right, Mr.
She's
Trudeau,
great.
trying to get in.
God.
Continues to pretend that it makes no difference.
If only we didn't have a two-party system.
Or a conservative or progressive government or a conservative government. We
I thought I saw a centipede
it makes a
behind me.
huge difference to families whether they
Okay,
have
now I'm feeling things and I'm
whether
scared.
they have a government that has their back, a government that has a plan to move beyond the Harper targets on fighting climate change. Now, Mr. Singh may feel that for the NDP it makes no difference who forms government. I know for Canadian families, it makes a
Mr.
huge
Blanchet, you
difference
haven't
that the government
been in
be
yet.
progressive.
Mr. Blanchet.
Translate subvention salariale.
Wage subsidy.
Wage subsidy. Did any of you three guys refund the wage subsidy that you received? Up to about $3 million. That would be something, at least for the principle. After that, there's an important issue, labor shortage. They are promising jobs. They should be promising workers.
Yes.
We need people to work. And that raises the question of productivity. This is the most important issue, and some programs should be turned toward that issue.
Mr. O'Toole.
Okay. Interesting angle.
He says he doesn't worry about monetary policy and inflation.
He's half right.
Saying he doesn't ever intend to balance the budget. He's spending $420.
I've been hearing this talking point for 21 fucking years. Oh, they don't balance the budget. They don't balance the budget. They don't balance the budget. It's literally since the day I was born. Conservatives have been saying, oh, liberals don't balance the budget. And then the liberals fucking do balance the budget. Stop lying to me, you dumbass.
Country, people still need the benefits. They should be there until the pandemic is over. And to the people of Canada, it is unfortunate we are in this election. You can see that there is a lot of work left to do. We need to get back to doing it in a more cooperative way.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Paul. Mr. Singh, I see you, Mr. Trudeau. Mr. Singh.
One of the specific programs we demanded 22 times in Parliament for Mr. Trudeau to expand was paid sick leave. Because in this pandemic, people had to make the impossible choice going into work sick or not being able to because they couldn't pay their bills. 22 times over 18 months, we demanded an expansion, and Mr. Trudeau said no to you and said no to your family.
Last word to you on this, Mr.
Expanding
Trudeau.
sick leave to 10 days of paid sick leave for federal
the
industries.
election,
Now, in the election, and this is
22 times
important,
of asking for
you
it.
have seen tonight the extreme differences between the perspectives of
Okay,
these parties.
leaders?
We need Canadians to make the right choice
Leaders,
so we
that
can
is
move
it.
forward together.
We're out of time. Evan, thank you. Leaders, thank you for your participation tonight.
Okay, that was interesting. That was a very interesting thing to hear. Okay, I'm voting tomorrow. Probably NDP. I'm still conflicted as to whether or not I'm voting NDP or Liberal. I think my vote isn't gonna matter in the end. But the Conservatives are off the table. They've made milquetoast conservative talking points and talked about how, hey, we're gonna do like private healthcare in Canada, which would be fucking insane. I need music. My music left. Where'd my music go? What? My music died. I didn't even realize. No. This? Sure, why not? Yeah. It was, this is a whole very interesting situation where, the parties are a lot more intense because this was the only debate. This was the only English debate. This was the party's this was the way that they were going to get their message out to the vast majority of Canadians. And they all know it. So they're all intense. They're all going at each other's throats. A lot of them made better talking points than I expected. None of them were as dumb as any American candidate. I was genuinely surprised at the Bloc Québécois candidate, who was sad for the most part, but did pull out some base takes that are gonna see him have a surge in the polls, I bet. Singh was constantly throwing pot shots. I like that a lot. Trudeau was on the back foot. And it's not surprising as to why, because he started this campaign, and from the he started this election, and from the word go, that was a bad idea. And it easily could cost him the election. The fact that this election exists in the time that it does now could cost him a lot. And that's very dangerous because Erin O'Toole is easily one of the worst conservative candidates I've seen in a long time. He's not milquetoast. He's not basic bitch ass. He's kind of milquetoast, but he is specifically proposing very dangerous ideas. And you know what? It makes me afraid, because I'm just starting 4 years of college, and I don't want to have to incur a bunch of expenses, whether it be mental health or other medical expenses, or just housing expenses that I wouldn't have to see, that I wouldn't have had to see otherwise, at least for 2 years from now. So, that's the stream. I don't know what I'm gonna do with this stream specifically. I don't think I want to unlist it like I normally do. All of the streams that you normally see are in the VODs section of my channel. They're in the VODs playlist. Gonna go to YouTube Studio. Yeah, I'm not gonna unlist this one because of I want the chat on screen for this one this time. Also, I have one last thing to check. Nope, almost. Holy shit, so I just need to stream tomorrow and then everything will be fine. But that was wild. That sort of sent me for a loop. I couldn't focus the entire time, and then I started drinking. Oh, holy shit. So if you want to watch other streams like this one with the chat on screen, you can check out the VODs on Twitch. You can check out the VODs on YouTube, because I stream on YouTube as well. You can check out some of the other archive videos on this channel where they're in higher quality, full screen, HD, 1080p, higher bitrate, all that good stuff. Cut into nice digestible sections for you, and you can come back here tomorrow, where I'm going to be starting something new, maybe. Maybe I'll go back to Zelda, maybe I'll go back to Metroid, maybe I'll go back to Sonic. I don't have drive to play more Sonic Colors Ultimate, I don't. But yeah, that's it. That's all I got to say. Thanks for hanging out. See you around.